Hi everyone, it's Caroline here. And today we're going to be talking about a factor in medicine that's communication. So, communication is just simply how ideas are spread. So, sometimes it's simply by word of mouth. So, someone goes up to someone and is like, I've just found this really great herb that's really good at solving a sore throat. Then we've got the fact that we've got books, so people are writing down their ideas, they're sharing them that way, all the way up to the modern period where we are so lucky we've got things like the internet that means we can share ideas really easily. So remember, this is part of 7 factors that we're going to look at. So religion and superstition, communication, which is this video, warfare, science and technology, chance or luck, so things happening without people really meaning to, the role of the government and individuals. So we're going all the way back to the Middle Ages. So communication in the Middle Ages is very, very slow. And it is difficult. So this is a time when not many people can read, not many people can write. So a lot of it is word of mouth. But really important to remember that ideas are still spread. And it's really common for students to kind of forget that and go in the Middle Ages, communication really, really bad. Don't forget the Middle Ages is a really long time period. It's hundreds of years. And in that time, word of mouth is getting around. So learning really is being passed down. So it's hands-on, practical learning. So apothecaries, you would be an apprentice to an apothecary. They would train you up. So they would tell you how to go about mixing the different herbs. Barber surgeons, it's very much hands-on experience. So you watch me pull a tooth out of someone. Okay, now next time it's your turn and I'll help you along. And in particular women. So those sort of herbal remedies, the wise women in the village are passing on their knowledge to their daughters, their nieces, their granddaughters, the neighbour's daughter that shows lots of interest, especially midwifery. So hands-on practical experience. So girls from quite young ages, 12, going along, helping out at first and learning as they go. So it's slow, it's difficult, but it is still happening. And there are, of course, the books being copied out by the monks. So it's handwritten and it takes them a long time. So consequently, books are very expensive, but they are managing it. They are, of course, censored by the church. So if the church doesn't like what they're saying, it's not going to be copied out, which is a problem with communication. And there is some errors in copying, and really, who can blame them? So the monks are spending all day, every day, copying up books. It must have been incredibly boring. And they do make mistakes. So we often see copies where there's a little bit sort of squidged into the margin or down the very bottom. Maybe it's out of sequence of where it should be because the monks made a mistake. So totally understandable. So the books aren't necessarily ideal ways of communicating. But we can see some examples there of just how beautiful these books are. So the works of Hippocrates and Galen, saved by Arabic writers in the Saxon and Viking times. So they come back to England in the Middle Ages and are copied out by the monks. Circa Instans, which is a great book on herbal remedies. So modern doctors have looked at these. They think about a quarter of them would work, would have some benefit. And if you think today of sort of Holland and Barrett, there are herbal remedies that absolutely work and were around from the Middle Ages. And then the big one, the Materia Medica by Dioscorides. So that's another book of herbal remedies that is being passed around. So being communicated. In the Renaissance, however, it's all going to get a lot better. So we get the printing press by Johann Gutenberg. It comes in right at the end of the Middle Ages. So it reaches England in the 1470s. The Middle Ages ends in the 1500s. So just be careful because the exam boards sometimes like to do this. They will give you something like the printing press. And they will say the printing press had a huge impact on the Middle Ages. How far do you agree? And if you're not careful, it's temptation to read it as the printing press had a huge impact, and you go off and you're like, yes, absolutely it did. It was amazing. It sped up ideas, it stopped mistakes, but actually not in the Middle Ages. By the time it gets going, we're out of the Middle Ages, we're into Renaissance. So actually, the impact on the Middle Ages was quite small. So just look out for anything like that. But it does mark the end of censorship. So now, if you want something published, it doesn't matter if the Catholic Church likes it or not, you can go to your local printer, you can get it done. So then we come into Renaissance, where communication is going to get easier. And we've got a couple of examples there. So, On the Fabric of the Human Body, which is the work of Vesalius. By fabric, he means like material. So, The Material of the Human Body by Vesalius. And then Harvey's book, less easy to remember, The Anatomical Account of the Motion of the Heart and Blood. So works of these people that perhaps wouldn't have been copied out by the church are more readily available for people. We also have what we call fugitive sheets. Now, this is the image we can see there with the sort of lift the flap. So if you couldn't afford a whole medical textbook, especially say you're a student, what they would do was fugitive sheets, so like notes. So you could buy a few pages. And this is a beautiful example of one from an anatomy book. And you can see it genuinely has like a lift the flap. So students could look at it and be like, what's under the stomach? And then you lift the flap and it's like, oh, they're intestines. So Renaissance equivalent of lift the flap books, fugitive sheets there to teach anatomy. You also have the Royal Society that come up in a lot of factors. So it's worth saying here that there are some examples that are in more than one factor, and Royal Society is one of them. So don't in the exam ever second guess yourself and be like, oh, well, the Royal Society, is that about communication or is it more in science? It can be in both. So the Royal Society, groups of scientists who get together and discuss scientific ideas, but the work they're published is held in a library within the Royal Society, so people can go and read them, read the latest scientific ideas. So then we're in the industrial period, 1700 to 1900. The Industrial Revolution kicks off from around 1750 onwards, and that's going to help massively. So, better transport. Because Britain's making more things, they put more money into building things like road, railways, canals. So, it becomes easier to get around the country, especially the railways. So, journeys that before would take a few days now can be done in one day. That's huge, and it's going to speed up communication. You also get the electric telegraph, greater and greater communication. So what this it stimulates debate. It is suddenly a lot easier to talk to someone on the other side of the country. So sharing ideas, debating ideas. When we start to get journals, so they're like magazines is probably the best way to describe them. Magazines that say a lot about medicine. So you finish your university degree, and then you want to stay up to date with modern developments. Maybe you're 20 years out of university. You want to know what's been discovered since then. You're reading the Lancet. And you can see from the pictures, it's still around today. So doctors today will still absolutely read the Lancet and be expected to stay up to date with it. So medical journals are coming around sharing ideas. And as an example to use, Lister first read about Pasteur's germ theory in the Lancet. So the Lancet published Pasteur's germ theory. Lister then very, very quickly starts to develop carbolic spray in surgery within that decade. So germ theory is 1861, late 1860s, Lister's using that work for carbolic spray. So newspapers as well, and now this is another way of standing out to the examiner because people tend to forget about this. And your great example is Florence Nightingale. So Nightingale is working as a nurse in the Crimean War, and the Crimean War is fascinating to all of the Victorian readers. So the readers cannot get enough information on the Crimean War. So a journalist is sort of scouting around for a new angle. What new stories can he drum up? And he comes across Nightingale and her nursing. And so, in particular, the Times sets up a fund where they ask for money for bandages and medicine. And it has a terrific response. The public really get behind her. And because of that popularity and that sort of celebrity that Nightingale has, she can then go on and she writes her book, Notes on Nursing. She sets up a school for nurses, the Nightingale School for Nurses. So that communication through the newspapers has an effect on medicine. So people remember books, they remember medical journals, but they forget newspapers. So worth remembering that one. And then up to the modern period. So penicillin is a great example of this. Alexander Fleming discovers it by accident. He writes it in a journal and then really forgets about it. Florian Chain happened to come along and read it and wait a minute, this sounds incredible. We need to investigate this further. So if it wasn't for communication, that idea would have died with Fleming. The internet has had a huge impact. So an earlier example, the Human Genome Project, which is when groups of scientists from all over the world were trying to map every single pair of chromosomes or every single chromosome and work out what chromosomes were responsible for what. So what was the specific gene that decided hair color or eye color? And they successfully did that working around the world. Much more recently, the collaboration on COVID. So vaccines, treatments, all of the work was being shared and helped across the internet. So the factor of communication, unlikely to be the main factor in any 16 mark argument, doesn't mean it won't, definitely, but it's unlikely. That's because in the Middle Ages, religion is much more important. Scientific thought in the Renaissance, industrial period, and modern period. So that's why it's unlikely to be the main factor. If it does come up as the main factor, you can argue religion in the Middle Ages and scientific thought in all the others. It's quite an easy counter argument. But what it does, though, is it enables the other factors. It helps out the other factors, either to have more of an effect or to have a quicker effect on medicine than would have happened without it.